Hey, sellers, welcome back. So this is going to be Initial Recce for a scenario Dave and I are going to be playing sometime soon. It's scenario 135 Acts of Defiance. This is also previously released in one of the ASL annuals, 95, I think it was. But this one has been, I think, errata has been issued and corrections have been made, I think. I'm not sure. I don't have access to that annual, so I don't know what changes, if any, were made. Um, Basically, what it is, it's a 1945 27 Feb scenario. So it's very late war in Breslau, Germany. It deals with Russians basically hold up in the center of the city of Breslau while the German counterattack tries to eradicate the pocket. It's going to be dealing with a lot of assault fire capable Russian troops, while the Germans got Fallschirmjaeger and pioneers on their side, which we're all going to get into in the details as we go. Historically, the Russians were eliminated in the pocket, although, of course, a few weeks later, the city itself fell to the Russian assault. But for the purpose of this battle, historically, the Russians were not the winners on this one. On Roar and ASL Scenario Archive, this scenario's got a rating of 8, which is pretty decent, actually. It's one of the higher rated ones on the Scenario Archives database. That's one of the reasons why I want to play it because obviously a lot of players have been getting enjoyment out of it, and it would also be an indication of game balance, the enjoyability factor. Uh, Rating wise, the scenario gives a slight edge to the for the Germans on Scenario Archive, but when you factor in the roar stats, the overall flavor I believe favors the Russians. So it's not a very big discrepancy. All total, there's about 342 plays between the two systems of recording, and the uh, the Russian German win rate is, like I said, favors the Russians over all those recordings. Um, Not a lot of in-depth ARs I've found online on how people have dealt with the situation. It seems to be a big hit miss thing is Russian artillery. While they do get plentiful ammunition, which is an extra black chit, if you fail to get a lot of artillery, which is one of your bigger area killers, well, your only one really is a Russian, it definitely hinders your results, apparently. At least that's what some players have found. But again, we're going to get into all that as we go into detailed analysis of the scenario. So victory conditions. What's the attacker objective? The German, who's the attacker in this case, basically has to eliminate all good order MMCs in the Russian setup area, which are highlighted with the red roads outlined here on the vassal. This is the Russian setup area, and there cannot be any good order MMCs at game end, of which there are 6 turns. So 6 turns to weed out the Russians from all this urban fighting. Definitely not an easy task, although the Germans have several tools at their hand to help them. The Russian is similarly equipped to withstand their assault, not to mention having a high ELR and good troops. So, important thing to note, it says good order Russian MMC. So, if the Germans are able to engage in melee on the last turn, those are not good order, nor are anything broken, obviously. So, just remember that if you're attacking this scenario for the first time and you weren't sure what good order means, um, unbroken and non CC is two things to maintain as much as possible. And that also means that the armor, which both sides have in this game, is almost a sideshow. I mean, they're going to help you achieve your objectives, but I would not spend, as a German, too much time trying to kill the Russian tanks, except to deny their attacks on you. Your focus should always be the infantry because that's how you win the victory conditions, by eliminating them. And if you defeat the armor in the process, all the better. But again, your focus should definitely be on the infantry. So let's go into unit compositions here. We'll start off with the attacker first. So this is going to be elements of the 1st Fallschirmjaeger Regiment 26 and some infantry division elements as well from the Wehrmacht, augmented by some assault guns that show up early on in the game. Um, the ELR is 3, which is all right, I guess. Although there's with the number of elite troops, you think it would be a 4, but your Fallschirmjaeger Pioneer platoon, which is two A38s and the two half squads, are ELR 5. So, but the rest of your troops are only ELR 3. So it's while you have an 8 morale is great. 3 ELR. It's not inconceivable that you might get some ELR replacements in the battle, which you really can't afford. You really want to have those high caliber 548s leading the charge. If they're reduced to 447s, which I believe is a progression, then it makes it that much harder for you to fight off 628s and 458s. Special abilities, we're going to get into the setups later on, but special abilities that you have to bear in mind with the German attacker. They have inherent Panzerfaust being 45, and the range in 45 is 3 hexes. So you have 3x range, although the to hit is, I believe, a 4 at 3 hex range. So it's not, or it might be a 6. It's not that great. So closer is obviously better. And the kill number on the Panzerfaust is 31, which a lot of the Russian armor is 18 with the inferior upper armor. So having the high kill number is definitely going to make it easier to do one shot, one kill, barring 12s, obviously. You've also got 3 Panzer Shreks for your force, 2 with the main force and 1 with a Hitler Youth second line half squad that's inside the setup area. But 3 Panzer Shreks, which again follow bazooka rules, and they have a kill of 26. So if you start hitting the hulls of the 18 armor class T-44s, you have to gamble on the dice rolls being in your favor to actually penetrate, barring range, obviously. So just something to bear in mind. And finally, ATMMs. If you're ever lucky enough to get into close combat with the Russian tanks, remember ATMMs, they give a -3 to your rolls. So there won't be too much in the way of ambush unless you get them inside the orchard hexes. But actually, I don't think orchard counts as ambush terrain either. You might be able to get some street fighting ambush, but aside from your assault engineers, you're basically looking at 5 CCVs. So if you add an ATMM, it makes you an 8 or less plus leadership to actually get a result. So you may want to consider that, or at least not forget that option in your toolbox. Speaking of the Hitler Youth half squad, so it's going to be setting up inside the Russian setup area. It sets up HIP in a sewer location, and it has to use sewer movement on the first turn. So it's a good little card, I guess, to play. You don't know where the Russian's going to set up because you have to put your HIP unit down first, and then he places his armor. And I'm sure most players will probably avoid intersections or proximity to sewer locations whenever possible, just because you don't want a free shot from this Shrek to pop up. Now, it's a second line unit, but they are fanatic and they are stealthy, so if it ever comes down to close combat or ambush, they are pretty they're pretty lethal, even if it's only a half squad. Again, a Panzer Shrek at point blank or 1 or 2 hex range will probably do a good number on your tanks, and again, the kill number on the Shrek is 26. So it's quite capable, especially with rear armor shots, to defeat the tanks that the Russians have. However, it's limited by the fact that it's in a sewer, so it has to pop up, and it can only do that in the advanced phase, and then it has to endure a Russian prep fire, possibly an overrun phase, before it can actually do any damage in defensive fire. So just something to bear in mind. It's a good little tool, but not sure how much use it's going to get, especially if the Russian places squads in proximity to the armor, and thereby precluding it from shooting. So something to bear in mind, again, if you're a Russian player as well. Germans get 4 leaders, which for 16 squads is their leadership generation number, so it's normal, I suppose. They don't get any real heavies except for the 1 medium to help out with the assault. So it depends on how you want to set up your fire base, if you do. Again, we'll get into tactics later on, but you have 4 leaders, including 2 8-0s, so you should have plenty of leader coverage to help with rallies. That are never going to happen, because you're going to be covering a lot of open ground, as you can see, to get to the actual enemy. and you need to have clear lines of retreat for your 80s to start rallying your troops. Your 9291 will probably be leading the charge. Their increased morale and their modifiers will definitely help you with shooting up close assault fire, as well as enduring any kind of morale checks that you may get. 16 squads, as we said, so there's going to be 10 548 Fallschirmjaeger and augmented by 6 467 first line infantry. Your 548s will likely be your assault troops, augmented by the 467s. Basically, I'm probably going to use them hanging back in some kind of ad hoc firebase position, especially because I need to cover the approach for my first wave, as it were, of assault troops. And again, there's a gap between the start positions, the first line of buildings to reach, and then into the actual entranceway itself. So if I can suppress any upper level LMG machine gun nest, so much the better. Looking at the Pioneers, so the Pioneers are basically a platoon. You have 2 full squads and 2 half squads. The 2 half squads are controllers for the Goliaths, of which you have 2. They set up in the bottom right of the scenario, and basically in one hex vicinity of this hex right here. And they're basically going to be acting 2 things. One is to stop like a blocking force for the Russian reinforcements that are going to be rolling in from the south on the first turn, and or maybe blow the bridges, and or help defeat the armor that's accompanying those infantry reinforcements that are going to be arriving from the south. There's only 3 squad equivalents, although they are led by a leader, so not a lot to deal with. But you have to cover both avenues. You have to stop the forces arriving from the south, and if possible, maybe send a squad or even a half squad to north to help with interdiction and routing denial purposes. So once your attack starts to go into full swing in the north, you may want to have units in the south to prevent rout and start doing failure to rout as an option. Again, it's going to limit your blocking force, but depending on how the battle goes, you might be able to pull a squad away to head north and contribute to the fight in the center of the map. Lastly, let's talk about the AFVs. So the German gets 2 AVs. These arrive on turn 1. You get a Jagdpanzer 470 and a Stupanzer 4 assault guns rolling in. They both have their weaknesses. One is they have no APCR. The Stupanzer does have heat, so there is that. So you're depending upon your basic caliber to destroy Russian tanks, and the Jagdpanzer 470s to kill numbers is 23. And again, the T-44s have 18 frontal armor, so if you can get the turret hit or a weaker side armor, then your chances of getting a kill are probably a lot better. The ISU that rolls in later on also has increased armor as well. And the yeah, they've got a 14, but again, their armor's inferior. So if you can, if you're lucky enough to get turret hits, chances are you'll probably get kills, but you have to survive to get there. The Stupanzer is going to be a 150, good against troops in those stone buildings, but again, it's going to be vulnerable to the T-44s. It's only got 11 armor, although the turret is up armored, and the T-44 kill number for the 85 long is a base 17, so it's not that great. They do have APCR, however, so it's 19 hex range, and if you get in close, point blank, obviously it'll help. 3 to 6 hex range increases that. So your Stupanzer is probably going to be in for a rough day. And the Russian does have OBA, so it is something to consider about, and it's on the 24 table, which basically means a 5 or a 6 are probably going to get a result. I think a 6 is a possible shock as a 5, but a 4 or less, and you could kill a tank with OBA. Something to consider. Because of the overnumbered Russian tanks, there's 5 to your 2. You may want to keep tank hunter teams in close proximity, or at least infantry elements close to your tanks to help fight off any armored assault that comes that way. And it goes without saying, you want to keep them away from the Russian infantry whenever possible, so they're not jumping on top of you in close combat and killing you then. Both tanks have smoke dischargers, so should it come down to it, you do have the option of popping smoke and protecting yourself that way. All right, so let's look at the Defender. So the Russian basically sets up in two phases. One is a reinforcements that enter from the south, and this is the form of 5 squads with a 50 cal machine gun, something to be aware of, and 2 of those ISU 122s. Good tank destroyers, 14 hull armor with an inferior turret armor, so they should be killable by your Schrecks, Panzerfaust, and your gun, assuming they survive any OBA and such. The main force that sets up in the setup area is consisting of 2 628s, 5 458s, and 3 527s. So you can see there's a lot of high morale troops. They have an ELR-4 as well, and they also got a lot of assault fire capabilities. So there's a lot of moving and shooting that the Russian can do, augmented by the 3 LMGs that they have for their force. Nothing heavy, just 3 LMGs, but again with a 6 firepower, 2 LMG, you're still looking on the 8 table at 2 hexes away, and God help you if he gets actually adjacent to you. Inside the setup area, you've also got 3 tanks. Now, in terms of setup area for the Defender, tanks have to set up on the road, and you cannot have more than 2 multi-man counters per building in the setup area. So, given the fact you only got 10 squads and a fairly large area to cover, you may want to spread your forces out more anyways, and not stack them so much. While it's nice to have, a 12, 16 firepower attack, stacking is usually not a good thing to do in squad leader. It just draws more fire, and it limits your choices of responding. It's better to have them adjacent in fire group than it is to stack in one location. You get a module of 120 OBA, which, as we said, is on the 24 column. In 1944-45, the radio was an 8 for contact purposes. So if you have contact, you're looking at 9s to maintain radio contact, which is pretty decent. Artillery is going to be, I think, your saving grace for the Russians, because it does such a bang-up job to neutralize an area. And again, on the 24 table, we're talking rubble creation, we're talking AFE kills, let alone what it does to the troops as well. So you have plentiful ammo, which means you get extra black chits. So your chit count is going to be 6 black and 2 red, which better than the typical 5-2. But there's still 2 red in the pile, so hopefully you get at least 2 or 3 fire missions before you draw that second red chit, and your OBA mission is done for the day. The 5 tanks you have coming on, including 2 reinforcements, again, like we already discussed, weak inferior turrets, so you may want to try and bear that in mind when you commence your assault. There's a lot of anti-armor weapons on the German side, so you're going to have to be aware of. So you're going to have to stay at least 2 hexes away from any squads, at least 2, maybe 3 is even better if you can get some kind of range, just to get away from the Panzerschreck and the PF range, which will kill your tanks, no problem. As we said, the 3 T-44s have to set up on-road hexes within the setup area, so you can't dig them in rubble or put them in off-road. They got to be on the road, which again makes them susceptible to that German Panzerschreck hunting team in your setup area, the Hitler Youth Half Squad. They're going to be set up on the road, and while it's going to take a turn for the German to move into position, you may want to factor that into how you set up and play. So make sure that there's some ground support to help shoot the half squad when it sticks its head out of the sewer, and it'll keep your tanks a little bit alive a little bit longer. Hand-to-hand is in play, so you have used the red hit numbers if you wish. Definitely whenever you have ambush, you want to use the red numbers. Whenever you outnumber them, guaranteed to kill, you probably want to use your hand-to-hand numbers. Just bear in mind, it also makes your defender have a chance to use those as well. So, but I think the hand-to-hand definitely favors the 628s, just because their sheer firepower is already at least 1-to-1 odds, and they're attacking back at 1-to-2 odds typically. So you already have an advantage there. Another great benefit for the Russians is you move last. So because the turn or game is only 6 turns long, you moving last allows you to save basically a half squad or a squad, whatever you have left. All you have to do is have one alive inside the setup area. So if you, for some reason, are able to keep him alive outside that setup area, you just have to assault move in, and you defeat the German victory conditions and thereby win. So it's a good little. It could save your bacon having that one squad that you save somewhere, leave it concealed, or move it outside into a stone building, and then just at the last turn, assuming it can, move it into the area and trying to achieve your objective that way. Not sure what the circumstances are that let you do that, but it may arise, and it's something to consider. Is because you move last, you don't have to go all hell's bells for the first 5 turns. Save a couple squads for that last turn to make a rush into the setup area, and again win that way. Let's look at the SSRs, which I've already glossed over, but the first one to bear in mind is your EC conditions and the weather. So EC are moist, which doesn't really play into things unless you want to start kindling, which you won't have time to do, I dare say. But it might affect things that your OBA comes in and starts to rubble and possibly create flame in locations. But generally speaking, the moist conditions probably not going to play into much. It is overcast conditions, which means rain on a chance on a 10, 11, or 12 when you do the wind change die roll. At 12, you'll also have gust, of course. And rain, just as a reminder, offers a low visibility hindrance for hexes 6 and beyond. And if it increases, which if you roll another 10, 11, or 12 in the wind change die roll, it increases in strength, that +1 applies for every range. So from a defender perspective, you're probably going to enjoy that little bit of extra cover. Gives you a little bit more freedom of movement to move around inside the buildings. And you're now looking at +4s in your stone buildings to hit. So the German's going to have to amass a lot of firepower to get a result with a +4 on a typical 12 or maybe even a 16 firepower attack. All woods are treated as stone rubble, so on this map I've already dropped down stone rubble where all the wood locations are. And all the hedges are stone, so there's a lot of +2 protection going on in the field, as well as +3 for the rubble. So it's only the wood buildings that are only +2 and the stone walls, but there's a lot of stone on this map for Russians to hide in, and firepower that the Germans are going to have to amass to overcome if they want to get results. In addition, at startup, there's inside board 20, which is the middle board, there's 4 multi-hex buildings that have stairwell symbols. 3 multi-hex and 1 single-hex multi-story building that has a stairwell symbol. And what you have to do is at the beginning of the term game, before the Russian setup, is for every hex inside those building, and there's a total of 14, you have to roll a 2 dice, and if you roll a 10 or more, that hex is rubbled. Now there's a chance for falling rubble as well, so you may have rubble appearing in adjacent hexes, and you could even, depending on your rolls, rubble a whole building, which of course would probably favor the attacker in this case because less ground for the Russian to hide in. But it's also a hindrance because rubble is 3 move to move into, so it's going to soak up most of your move just to advance into it, and you still have to root out the Russian that sets up inside it. So again, something to bear in mind is the chances of rubble, so there's going to be more likely than what's depicted on this map here. Don't forget to roll for the rubble before the setup. In addition, last thing with the terrain is the bridges over the canal. The canal itself is deep and so basically non-fordable, and it's only passable over those 2 bridges. There's bridges are 1 lane as well, so once traffic passes in a certain direction, they become blocked if a vehicle comes the opposite way. So I don't see vehicles traversing back and forth. They're probably going to head one direction, but it may come into play. And being one lane, that means they're also narrow, so there's not going to be any kind of bypass. A single vehicle is basically going to block the bridge. So if you have with your two tanks for the Russians, you may have to split up, send one tank to each bridge, depending on what the Germans are doing. But you definitely don't want to stop on the bridge if you have two tanks, because the other one can't pass it. Again, some just limitation you have to worry about is the bridges. The last thing about terrain then is going to be the orchards. So they're all out of season, so they become hindrances. They do not block line of sight from looking at an upper level to a lower level. They just become +1 hindrances. So again, bear that in mind. One of the SSRs, again, is the Hitler Youth that sets up HIP. We've already discussed this. It sets up anywhere in a manhole location on this center board. So remember, manhole locations are the circles within the boards, the buildings, as well as any road intersection is a manhole location. So for example, in this particular case here, there are 4 manholes, plus there's one adjacent as well. So something that you have to plan with your troop is where the German or where the Russians likely going to set up his vehicles. Again, you don't know. More than likely, the Russian will probably set up in some kind of depth. That way they can help stay concealed at start. So I'm likely probably going to plop them down here in the center somewhere, maybe even in Z27. But somewhere around here is probably where I'm going to be putting my Hitler Youth. And remember, he has to use sewer movement on the first turn. So he's not... he can't pop up to the advanced phase, which means he has to endure the Russian turn 1. And then sometime during that turn, he can actually fire. So hopefully he has a target for his Shrek. The Pioneer Platoon, as we said, are assault engineers. So the smoke exponent's going to be 5. So while there's only 2 squads in the south, having a 5 smoke exponent is definitely handy. And especially if they're able to support the attack into the north and for moving around the general. So don't forget your smoke exponents. Use them when you have them. It's something I tend to forget. I don't know why, but using inherent smoke grenade capability. Make sure you use it. Now, once rain starts and wind picks up, obviously you might have an issue. But until that point, use the smoke grenades as much as you can until they run out. Your 2 half squads are your controllers, so their task is basically going to be to drive those Goliaths into position, and you want to use those Goliaths. Well, I'm probably going to try and use them to blow up one of these bridges, and the other one maybe destroy some troops. Maybe if I'm lucky enough, hit up a tank with it. I've never used a Goliath before, so it's going to be something I'm going to have to learn. Which is another reason why Dave and I want to try these scenarios, because they have a lot of moving pieces, different squad types, OBA tanks, and Goliaths. So when you tack on DC charges as well, it's there's a lot of stuff to consider. So I'm going to have to figure out how to use a Goliath. And hopefully, with any luck, I get some results against the Russians. I'm probably going to use 1 to blow up this first bridge here. They do have 6 move. Again, I'm not sure how it works. Maybe they move and then fire in the advancing fire. I believe that's the case. So I might be able to get a chance to have a set DC or placed DC attack on this bridge and have a better chance of destroying it. But I may get shot up by the Russians. So again, who knows? We'll see how that goes. We've already discussed hand-to-hand is in effect. The use of the red numbers on the chart. Normally it's only available to the attacker, but if the defender gains ambush, and the defender could declare it as well. One thing I'm not clear about with hand-to-hand is if you start off as a melee, can you switch to hand-to-hand? I don't think you can. I don't think the rules say you can do it. So by inference, it's probably not allowed, but it might be an option that I'm finding in when I'm playing my Valor of the Guards solo campaign is sometimes it might be in your best interest to use the hand-to-hand numbers, but I don't think you can switch back and forth. It's going to be an either or. Once you declare it, you can't obviously go back. But at what point in the combat can you declare hand-to-hand? Is it only initially during the close combat phase, or can you actually do it during a melee as well? So that I'm not aware of, but it's something to consider. And because no quarters in effect, units are going to be low crawling away. They're not going to be surrendering, barring heat of battle. So they're going to be moving away from the Germans as much as possible. Lastly, for SSRs, we have the Russian OBA. So it's again a module of 120, which is the 24 table, HE and smoke. I doubt you're going to use smoke. You're going to use HE and just punish the Germans for the temerity of attacking you. Your observer set up HIP. And one thing about terrain that I failed to mention is all the buildings north of the canal. So everything north of the canal is only 1.5 level obstacles. So these are not 2.5 level obstacle buildings. They're all 1.5. And which means you're probably going to put them up here, maybe an X3, set them up in a position where they can see some advance warning and then start pummeling the area with fire for effect. This might be another good spot up on the first level, but because it's wood and so close to the enemy entrance areas, which we're going to cover, you may not want to use that there. In the stone building, HIP is probably best, and maybe up on the first level, or again up here on the first level. Somewhere where it's got good vantage point where you can drop an artillery. So the way you're going to have to do it is you're spotting around, assuming you have contact and access on the first turn, will hopefully land in the German defensive fire phase. And then with luck, it'll land close to where you want it for your prep fire phase that you can convert in place. So best case, by turn 1 on the Russian side, you might have an FFE land. But again, vagaries of the chit system for drawing black and radio contact. Again, you start off with an 8. There's no guarantee you're going to get OBA, and if you don't, the Germans are going to be in amongst your own troops very quickly, so you're going to have some danger close activity, which don't be afraid of using it if it's definitely going to help your game plan. If you have one squad and a lot of Germans and a lot of armor, you may want to just drop it down anyways, and at the sacrificing the one squad. Again, something that you have to bear in mind. All right, let's do some terrain analysis using the military intelligence OCKOA acronym. Basically, it's observation fields of fire, cover and concealment, obstacles, key terrain, and avenues of approach. It's an intelligence analysis tool to help define the battle space. And let's kind of use that for here. So this is going to kind of be a test to see if it works for the for ASL or not. I think that the tenets of it do apply, but it might just be too cumbersome, and I may drop it for later ones. But for right now, we're going to use this format here. The caveat I have to throw out at the beginning, of course, is that a lot of this is going to be dependent on rubble generation and the Russian setup. So once the rubble starts being generated in those multi-hex buildings with stairwells, obviously that's going to impact some of what I'm talking about. And of course, the Russian setup area will clearly mitigate what I'm talking about. But as a general rule, these points should apply regardless of setup. So first things first is observation of fields of fire. So Russians have the advantage of high firepower troops in hard cover positions. Now they're limited by range because they have 628s and 527s, but with their assault fire capability, you want to move up close anyways. Don't hang back in the defensive too long. If there's a chance to exploit an attack, you may want to use it. Although bear in mind you have to keep at least one good order squad alive by the end of the game, so don't sacrifice everything at once. But you have a lot of high firepower troops, so basically the Germans are only going to be able to enter in from 2 zones, as I see it, up in the north, unless they want to come in down the middle where it's nice wide open. And the 2 zones I'm talking about are basically, I see this as a German setup area. This is a German setup area. And the first courses of action are probably going to be to enter this building and this building on the first turn. And from there, they can exploit in and maybe sandwich the terrain. They're going to have armor that's going to be approaching in from the north. So Likely choices for it is maybe bring in um, the Stupanzer here, so it can start blasting troops, and your Jagdpanzer wherever the Russian tank is where you want to bring your unit up to and start peppering those T-44s and try and destroy them as quickly as possible. Once you're done that, you can maybe switch to HE on the troops and or support the attack. Again, all depending on where the Russian armor sets up. But that's the way how I see it. So there's going to be two general setup areas. So as a Russian, what you want to do is you're probably going to set up, again, you could set up in depth, like somewhere in here. Let me change color for that. Set up in depth here, maybe out of the line of fire. This one here, you're probably not going to be able to be concealed, although you do get 4 dummy counters, which you can use as concealment instead of dummies. So that's off a good vantage point. Or you may want to hunker way back here, have a couple squads here for the inevitable Hitler Youth guy to pop up. But your defense is going to be something like that, spread out. You only have to worry about the 2 avenues. Maybe you can sacrifice a squad up here to do some early advance shooting, but anything you set up forward is probably going to get shot by a German fire base itself on the first turn. Now you're in a +3 stone building. You'll start off probably concealed with a dummy counter, but with enough firepower, that might be broken. And if you depend upon this guy here to have fire lanes or blocking avenues of approach, it may not be your best choice. But again, something for you to consider. The point about hanging back is it lets you gain concealment for all your troops, and you can basically play the skulking game as much as possible. For the Germans, again, you got the 2 setup areas. You've also got your Pioneer platoon setting up down here somewhere. Now, you've only got 3 squad equivalents with 2 Goliaths. So as I see it, the Goliaths are going to be working their way down to here. Maybe you can blow up this bridge. I can see the Pioneer squads making their way to this building here because that gives them good access to the bridges to cover. Depending on how this battle goes, you can then break away one of the squads and he can come north and help fight this battle here. So if he sits in something like this location and you start forcing broken units to the edge, then they're going to die for failure to rout, or it's going to definitely impede their ability to get away from you. Again, for the Russians, you have to bear this in mind. You're going to have this blocking force to the south. Your reinforcements are going to come on from this way in the form of those 5 squads and 2 tanks. Now, depending how you want to use your armor, you can use them as either armored assault, get some cover for your guys. You can use them as tank riders to get really far up before the German gets into position, or some combination thereof. You may want to consider setting up up on the first level in this location here, your 50 cal, especially up on the first level, just because it gives them a nice range right down the road. Any German moving back and forth is going to get hit with a -2 on the A table, so that's a pretty substantial hit. I don't think you need to sacrifice a leader with it. Use that 1 leader to keep your troops moving forward. You're probably going to need them there. But something to consider is where you set up your 50 cal. You could lug it with you, in which case you can't fire it in advancing fire phase, but at least you'll have it up close. Or you can set it up here on a first level base and then bring steady fire at least onto this area, and definitely help suppress the Pioneers that are going to keep your blocking force from moving. Since the Russians move last, something the German has to consider is, and the reason why you have to set up in 2 areas is you cannot all set up in 1 area, although you might, and work your way across. Let's get rid of some of that. You can set up in 1 area and do your complete attack all the way across, clearing out the area as you go. But all you're going to do is push the Russians away. You've only got 6 turns, so once that last turn materializes, if you push him into this building, for example, he just has to step onto the road and he just defeated your objective. I think the Germans going to have to set up in 2 different locations, one in this area and one in this area, and you're going to have to sandwich them. So as a defender, you can bear that in mind. Again, how you set up your forces. You may want to be in depth and gain concealment, or you may want to be forward and help them deny easy access to this front row of buildings. Particularly on this side, it's only a wood building, so unless he uses assault move, it's going to be +1, maybe +2. With your firepower, you might be able to get some early breaks and ease the pressure. For the Germans, again, you're going to have 2 setup areas, and which are going to be your first assaults are probably going to be again into this large multi-hex building and into this wood building. From there, you work your way across the road. You have 548s, which have a 2 smoke exponent. Again, smoke grenades, well, it's only a 2. It does offer you a chance of covering your approach, and dashing across open ground is a sure recipe for death. You may have to spend a turn once you get into those early frontline positions, breaking the troops across from you before you advance, which is, again, a reason why the Russians may not want to set up in defense and forgo concealment to help deny those kind of attacks. Something else you may want to consider as a German is a fire base of your own. Again, if the Russian sets up somewhere here, say on the first level, you can have a medium, maybe an LMG with 2 squads and even a neg leader, and you'll do a good job of suppressing him, because if he sets up here, he's going to have a clear line of sight all the way along here and up to this building as well. So you may want to stop that as much as possible and try and break him quickly. If he sets up in depth or up on the first level, your fire options really are limited. You're probably going to, you could set him up on a first level somewhere in the back, maybe here, or maybe even up here on the first level, just depending on how you want to do your main thrust of your attack. But you also want to stay mobile, because at some point you're going to have to move him, and if he's spending most of his turns moving, he's not bringing down fire. So a better use for him might be to keep him close on the ground, maybe assault movement to this location here, and from there you definitely have a better advantage to attack upper levels, as well as this building here, support the attack into it. And it might be better to have your fire base close in this location here rather than up on a first level over here somewhere. Again, just something to bear in mind. Second bullet of OCKOA is cover and concealment. So again, the German's going to have some covered approaches. There's this area here that's open to fire, especially from this hex. This area here is going to be covered, so this is going to be pretty well unimpeded. So you'll definitely be in this location at the end of the German turn 1. Depending how much fire you have to endure across this area, you may have to suffer some casualties if you don't get a smoke off, but you should be able to get into this position with your leaders at least along this line. Maybe advancing in just so you're not shut up in the defensive fire phase. You can't really deny the Russian targets. You have to get into his face, and that's going to make you a prime target for an OBA attack as well as his concentrated fire. Again, for my scenario purposes, I have no idea how Dave's going to set up. He's quite tactically smart about this kind of thing, and I have no doubt I'm not going to compensate for it. So when I show you my setup, what I think you might do later on, obviously take that with a great grain of salt. Germans definitely want to use your smoke just to help cross the road. Don't forget dashing as well. So if you're new to dashing and smoke, those are key to covering your advances across those roads. There's a lot of open roads, and between the tanks with their machine guns and main guns and all the assault fire capable Russian squads, 10 of them, crossing those roads is probably going to be death, and you're probably going to lose some squads in the process. But again, with proper smoke, and if you're lucky enough to get some early breaks, maybe you can find a clear way across that first street. And then once you're into this melee terrain here, it's a matter of working your way through the rubble orchards and into the stone buildings and pushing the Russians out. Again, looking at the pioneers in the south, so this is their setup area, basically within 1 hex of this location. The way I'm probably going to play it is I'm going to send a Pioneer platoon this way. They're going to take a position here, both squads with two LMGs and a leader, and they're basically going to wait for the Russian reinforcements, and they're going to try and suppress them as long as possible. Again, depending on how my Goliaths do, if I can blow a bridge and limit him to one bridge, that's all the better. I am going to get pummeled with tanks shooting me in the face. With any luck, the Russians will break their guns, though, and I won't have to worry about them too much. But my Pioneers will have a platoon minus in this location to cover this bridge and to cover this bridge if it does not get blown. So they should be able to do a good job of keeping the German Russians down, again, until the tanks start popping smoke in their face or HE or something along those lines. And at some point, I'm going to use this covered approach to probably send in one squad north, maybe to this location here, just to help break up any route paths potential, as well as to cover this area here and help sandwich in the Russians in between the two attacks. Now, again, the defender, you have a couple of choices. You can set up in depth with dummy stacks. You have 4 dummy stacks or 4 concealment counters that you can use as dummies. So you can have 2 sets of 2 or 1 of 3 and use 1 as concealment. Or you can set your troops up forward and use those counters as concealment for your frontline units, depending on how you want to do it. I don't think Dave's going to set up in depth. He's probably going to set up forward. And because I have to advance into position to shoot at him, I'm unlikely to get a chance to get a heat round into any of his buildings. However, there's a couple of spots that you could do that. Maybe this area here, fire a heat round into this building, depending on where he is. But that's about the only one. Aside from that, you're going to have to move, occupy your front buildings, and from there, commence your attack. Remember, Shreks and buildings have the blowback penalty. You want to bear that in mind and pay the extra plus 2, I think it is, to fire outside the building, so you're not paying that cost. As a Russian, you have many +3 stone buildings and rubble to hide in. Depending on the rubble rolls, so remember every one of these hexes here, these ones here, the wood ones in this building, and this building itself can all generate falling rubble, which means you might have more rubble around it if it rubbles itself. You might have the whole building rubble with rubble around it, so there's going to be plenty of spots for you to skulk and hide. You don't have to sit there and take a German fire attack on the face. You can play more stealthily and keep your concealment and wait for him to get close and then jump on him in close combat with your 6 firepower attack concealed and maybe even ambush. You'll probably do a good number of them in close combat using hand-to-hand numbers. There's going to be a hip half squad in the Russian setup area that you have to bear in mind somewhere. It's going to be set up on a sewer location, so again, likely locations are any road intersections, maybe the building and location itself. That's where they're going to start, and then they have to use sewer movement on the first turn. So on the advanced phase, you may see a head pop up, although it's going to be concealed. You're not going to be able to shoot it unless it's discovered. But you want to bear that in mind with your armor to make sure that you have some kind of local support for your tanks. Because while the tanks don't play into victory conditions, their firepower will definitely help you eliminate the pesky German squads that get too close or move incorrectly. And finally, you've also got a hip observer, so use him wisely. At some point, you may have to call in artillery on himself. Now, you're probably going to hide him in a stone building, so he's going to have some protection. On an upper level, gives him advantage points over all the other rubble. But that also makes him a little bit more susceptible to his own artillery, because if you can keep him on a ground level, he'll get at least an extra +1 from the roof above him when it comes to his own fire attack. And a +4 is on the 24 is always better than a +3. So that's basically the cover and concealment. So let's look at obstacles. As I see it, the only obstacles that have to be considered are essentially the 2 bridges. They're key for a couple of reasons. One is they allow the Russian reinforcements, which again, 5 squads brings you up to 15, which is parity with the Germans. You want to bring them into the setup area as soon as possible to help with the fight, or at least in the last turn to help deny the German victory condition. From the German perspective, they're choke points in that the Russians have to pass through them. So if you can concentrate fire and suppress them, all the better. Your Germans act as a blocking force, denies the ability of the Russians to move. They have to spend time eliminating those pioneers who have 8 morale and are A3A troops. So it's not going to be an easy job, especially if they're already in position and maybe even concealed. Defender with your reinforcements, again, you're going to have to consider how to bypass those bridges. You want to maybe use tank riders to get across them as quickly as possible, bearing in mind the Germans probably already in position. Or you're going to have to do a slow, methodical approach, eliminating opposition as you get to it, and hopefully the Goliaths don't do a number on them. If the Goliaths manage to destroy both bridges, your blocking force in the south is useless. And you're now hampered that much more by having only what you started up with in the setup area to fight off the outnumbering Germans. So again, the obstacles, besides the rubble, which will suck up all your move, the buildings are about the only thing you can really depend on as a defender to slow down the attack, because it's going to take so much movement to get through there. Even having a concealed squad up on a first level, he has to be rooted out. And while there's plenty of opportunity for encirclement fire, there's no guarantee you're going to get it. And you can delay the German that much more if you deploy a squad appropriately and hide them in the building somewhere. Again, just to reiterate for the victory condition, all you need is one good order MMC inside that setup area. How you get that is really up to you. Key terrain. So this is the second last point of OCKOA. It's terrain that has to be gained in order for the objective to be achieved. So for an attacker, having positive control or at least fire ability on these 2 bridges is key. If this does not happen for whatever reason, too many reinforcements make their way through it, your forces in the north are going to have that much harder of a battle to achieve their objective of defeating the Russians. So the Germans have to control those 2 bridges. They also have to have good control in this building and in this building as well to support their attacks further. Once you're in those buildings, it's quite easy to suppress those wooden buildings and work your way across. These ones here are going to be that much more difficult to root out the Russians. And on this side here, again, you're going to have all this rubble to go through just to reach these locations here and root out the Russians. You may end up pushing him back all the way to here, but again, on the last turn, he just has to bring in 1 squad. So make sure you're aware of the victory condition, and if you do push him outside the setup area, make sure that you deny any chance for him to come back in, at least uncontested, without a good neg shot if he has to move in open, which luckily it's surrounded by roads, which means it's going to be a moving and open shot. You might even get a neg 2 shot, so you're going to have to use that. So that's the key terrain for the attacker. For the defender, the stone building is going to be your key terrain. You can bounce from building to building with +3 defensive terrain, which is really good because the Germans have to amass significant firepower to put a dent in. A 4.67 with an LMG, 6 firepower is not going to do very much with a +3 terrain effect modifier. So they're probably going to have to stack or fire group in such a way to bring down 8, maybe 12 firepower attacks on you, and then it becomes less decisive to have that terrain. But until he does that, you have lots of terrain to hide in, so you use that to your advantage. For you as well, those bridges are a must. You must at least retain control of one of them, so your tanks can at least make it across, and your infantry as well. You're going to have to fight off a German platoon of pioneers that are going to be held up close and covering the bridge with fire, but with your armor and the fact that they don't have a Shrek down there, only their inherent Panzerfaust, which remember 3x range, but bear that in mind. You're going to have to do a good job of suppressing those pioneers so you can cross the bridges, but you have to attain at least 1 bridge if you want your reinforcements to influence the battle at all. Lastly, let's talk about avenues of approach. So again, this here is the Russian setup area, where you set up your 10 squads and your 3 LMGs and your 3 tanks. The Germans, for their part, set up basically on this board north. And again, you're probably going to have a large group here, a slightly smaller group here, and maybe a fire base back in one of these building locations just to help suppress anything that's going to interfere with the German assault. The path in, I can't see anybody coming this way because you're just going to get murdered. -2 shots in the open. You don't even have orchards to help cover up the approach. The only way I see it is coming through this way into those buildings and coming into this way through those buildings. Whether you do it as everybody on one side or the other, and you just funnel in and you sweep from one side to the other, that's going to be entirely on your how you do it. For me, I think having a two angled approach is best. It helps to sandwich the Russians in between, and it helps to condense them down a little bit further. You have to have enough troops on either side, however, that you can influence the battle. If you're too weakened on one side, the Russians are just going to turn and they're going to punish that side. And when you start talking the effectiveness of OBA and the fact you only have 16 troops to start with, it could quickly swing not in your favor. Use your tank hunters to get rid of those T-44s as quickly as possible. They have an 85 long, and they only have a they have 5 firepower machine guns, which you have to bear in mind as well. But an 85 long will do a number on you. I think that's on the 20 table, the 16 table. Even with the +3, well, that'll be taken account of in the hit roll. You're looking at some serious damage being incurred if they hit you with that gun. So the sooner you destroy those tanks, the better. But just to bear in mind as well that that's not the focus of this. It's the infantry that are the key. So if you have a choice between the two, breaking infantry or dying from a tank shot, you may want to break the infantry, especially if it's the last turn. And that's basically going to be it for this initial recce. So having said all that, this is the kind of setup that I'm thinking of going with. I'm going to have basically this force coming in from the northwest. This will be in from the northeast. And it's only going to be platoon plus. And the rest of the company forces are going to be coming in from this way here. I'm going to be able to achieve this building. I will be able to move into this building by the first turn. The question is where does he set up any kind of forward defense? Any kind of MG nest in this location can reach all the way down here. So if he's up on the first level, you can actually see R10, which covers all this open ground. So I'm going to have to take at least an egg 2 or something shot, which is why my 548s are leading the charge with their 2 smoke exponent. Hopefully they can get those off, and it'll help me feel a lot better. These guys here are going to move into the wood building, and they're basically going to be like an anvil, which I'm going to smash them against. So if this breaks for whatever reason, then they'll start exploiting it. But I'm going to try and keep them in this location, maybe into this location here. Again, depending on how the battle goes. Just to offer some kind of anvil for my main force to strike against. In the south, again, like I've discussed already, I'm going to send in 1 Goliath here on the first turn. I think that's how it works, and then I fire it in the advancing fire phase. Or I can wait till the Russian defensive fire phase and blow it then as a placed DC, I think. I'm not really sure on how that works. But that's where I'm probably going to set them up. This other one here, I'm probably going to move over here to do the same with this bridge, or depending on where that Russian armor shows up, or if this one fails, either I'll send them to this bridge and try again, or I'm going to send them up against the reinforcements. But I'm going to have most of my pioneers sitting this location. 2 squads, 2 LMGs with a 9mm leader. They can get this bridge under cover, they can bring this bridge under cover. Anything that moves, I should be able to do a good chance of shooting them up, because the Russians don't have any smoke. All they have is their armor and these orchards to get some kind of low visibility hindrance. So if it starts to rain on my parade, as it were, then it'll make it that much more difficult for me to get those kind of key shots. This here I have is an 8.1 with the 50 cal and the 6.28. I don't know if you need the 6.28 as a Russian. Sorry, the 8.1. I think an 8 firepower machine gun attack right down the beaten zone is more than sufficient to deal with that. But that's basically my setup. What I'm looking at. I'm thinking something like this is probably what we're going to have. Russian maybe on this level, on the first level. Again, I haven't accounted for any rubbling. That's going to happen depending on how Dave rolls, because he's the one that rolls, and maybe a lot, maybe a little, I don't know. Last couple games that throw down the gauntlet, his dice have been high. So if he continues to roll 10s and 11s, there's going to be a lot of rubble in this game. But he's going to be using the Russian nationality dice, so maybe they'll start rolling a lot lower. Again, we'll find out as that goes. But yeah, this is my setup. One Shrek on each side. They have their inherent Panzerfaust capability. I must remember ATMMs in close combat. I typically forget those because it's not a counter that you normally see, and I rarely use them. So if I should ever jump on one of his tanks, I'm going to have to try and remember to use an ATMM chance to blow them up. But again, the focus is going to be killing the infantry. If I can break them all, then I've won. And I don't care if he has all 5 tanks blowing me up. As long as I keep him broken and away from that setup area, then I win. So tanks are not critical. They may need to be taken out, but they're definitely not the focus of this assault. Again, something to bear in mind as a German. Your target is to destroy MMCs. You don't even care about the hip guy, although the sooner you get that hip observer, the better, especially if he's raining down hell on your troops. So once he draws a second red shit, then you don't really care about him. And then he just becomes somebody to help rally the Russians that will hopefully be breaking, even though they have ELRs of 4. You maybe even get a couple of ELR reductions on those 6.28s. Wouldn't that be nice? That's going to be enough for this initial recce. Let me know what you think of the format, if it's too involved or if it's not involved enough. I'm curious to know any other tactics, tips that you might do if you were faced with this kind of scenario. Obviously, I haven't played this before, so I have no idea how any of this is going to work. This is typically why Dave and I play games multiple times, so we can work out the best angles. And most guys don't have the luxury of playing the same scenario twice or even 3 times. So if you've played this and you see this video, by all means, please comment down below what you think or point me to an after action that I can reference. And without further ado, we'll see you guys in the next video. All right, bye-bye.